In this video, we're going to create a Svelte app that has a login that uses a simple database for authentication. We're going to go over how to check if the user's logged in on every request using a hooks file, and also show you how to make nice error messages and a mobile-friendly UI. We're going to start off with the blank app. The only thing I've done ahead of time is add a few images, UI components, and a database connection file we'll use. If we run the app with npm run dev, we can see it's just the minimal app you get at first. Let's start off by creating a login path under routes and a plus page svelte file under that path. We're going to be using Tailwind classes for almost everything here. It's just basically a shortcut way to write inline styles. Plus Tailwind only generates the classes you use when the app is built in order to keep the size down. Styles in Tailwind affect mobile sizes first, and if you want different looks for larger screens, you need to specify that separately. The main containing div will be a flex box with two panels, and I want the first panel to be a nav bar on mobile, but have it side by side with the second panel on desktops. So to force it to not wrap on desktop sizes, we'll just add the LG colon in front of the class. The first panel will just have a logo, and we'll make it a dark gray color, a static height for mobile, and the full screen height on desktop. We'll also set full width on mobile and a percentage of the screen on desktop. Then we'll also add some padding. The second panel will be the main content, which in this page will be the login box. The screen will be full height on mobile minus the top bar height and the full height on desktop. Then on either side, it'll take up the remaining width. Back in the first panel, I'll add the logo. When adding assets, the static folder is the root when the app is built, so you just type a slash to reach anything in the static assets. We'll give it an alt description and set a width. Then in the main window, we'll add the login box. It'll be full width on mobile and 380 pixels on desktop, and we'll give it rounded edges and a light background. Now let's check out our changes. Here's the two panels. If we resize the screen with the DevTools screen, you'll see the panels move around as needed. Let's make the login box stand out more by adding a dark image as the background to the second panel. Now let's center the logo and box. We'll do that by making each panel a flex box and using the justify content and align items classes. Now the logo is centered vertically and to the right. Let's do the same for the login box. We can make the flex box a column instead of a row to reverse the align and justify options. And now the login box is centered and next to the logo. Notice also the login box gets centered and fills the width on mobile, and the logo moves to the left. Now in the login box, we can add a heading, the inputs, and a button. I'm going to style the inputs so they are rounded and a little bit bigger than default. The buttons will be the same size as the input, but a dark bluish gray. And then let's align everything in a column with flex and give them a little gap. This also spreads them out full width by default. Now let's work on making the form work. We'll add a form tag and set the action to go to a SvelteKit action called login, and we'll show you where that ends up a little later. Then we'll set the method to post and add the Svelte use enhance to emulate normal form behavior, but without the page looking like it reloads on submission. You can check out the Svelte docs for more info on how that works, but basically we have an area in the action where we can do something before the form is submitted, and a callback function for when we get the submission result. In our callback function, we needed to check if the submission was successful, and if so, do something. Since this is a login page, we'll just send them to the main page when they're done. We also need to check if the form result is a redirect. If so, we'll just send them to that page and clear the form. And then the final catch will be for errors. An error might be a built-in error object or a custom one we'll send back. So we'll check for either of those. And then finally, we need to make a way to show the error to the user, but we'll come back to that. Now let's create the script that will process the form submission. This will be a plus pageserver.ts file in the same login path. In this file, we need to have a function that matches the action on our form, which we called login. In that function, we should have access to the form's inputs through the request parameter. We get the data from that using form data. And then we can read each input by calling a get function, sending the name of the input to the function. We then should check if the incoming data is valid using some if statements. We do this because people could reach this page without submitting a form, or someone could manipulate the form, and we of course want to throw an error if it's not what we think it is. To throw an error from a form response, you can use the built-in fail function. Give it a status code and a message. And this message is what we're looking for back on our useEnhance function. After we check the input, we can now see if what they submitted matches the database. Here's the query that will do that using a PostgreSQL database. I already have the database set up, but here's the schema for it. You'll need to enable the crypto extension in order to do the password hashing. We also need the UUID extension to generate the GUI IDs. Then we have a users table with a user ID, email, and hash password. And finally, a sessions table that will hold the session GUI ID, the related user, and some date fields. To run our SQL statement, I have a pre-made class-like function for connecting to and reading the database. The class has a query function, and that function needs the SQL code and any parameters required for the statement. And if we drill into that file, you can see we have functions for doing query and checking the connection. The query function checks to see if there's an existing connection and uses that if so. Otherwise, it'll create a new connection. This is called a singleton pattern, and it allows you to connect to a database just once and then run multiple statements on that connection instead of reconnecting for each statement. I can share this file with you all if you'd like. I use it on my production apps and at work, and it runs great. We do need to install PG in our app, though, to get this working. So we do npm install PG, and then we also need to do @types PG in order to get the TypeScript checking working. Now back in our login script, we can check if the SQL statement failed by looking for 0 rows. This would mean that the username and password did not match. We'll throw an error if so. This will get shown to the user eventually. If it worked though, we should convert our database row into a JavaScript object so that the error checking and autofills work in our editor. To do that, we first need to create an interface that defines our user object. This can be done anywhere, but for this, I'll make an interfaces file just right under our lib folder. In this file, we'll define a user's interface and say users have a user ID and email, and then we'll export that. Back in the login script, we can now create a new variable that will be our user and spread the properties from our database row into the user's object. There's other and better ways to do this with error checking and manually mapping each field. But in this case, for now, we know the user database row will match our object, so we can do it this quick way for now. After we have the user, we can create a session row in the database and set the user ID to be that user's ID. And you can see, since we are referencing an object of type iUser, We have access to the autofill in the editor, which is really handy. We'll then get the session response from the database and save it to a variable. This variable will also have a new type from the interface. So back in our interfaces file, we can just add another one for sessions. There we only care about the GUI ID, but you can track other properties or fields if you ever wanted to. Next, we'll set the cookie in the user's browser. In order to use the built-in cookie object, we need to add it to the parameters on top. Then the first parameter is the cookie name, followed by the value, which will be our session GUI ID. Then some options such as what page to use it on and the max age of the cookies. Then finally, this function requires a response, so we'll just send back success true. And let's fix our interface spelling really quick. And just so you can see how the form response works, let's log it in the console and submit the form. First of all, it looks like the login worked, so that's great. But also if we look at our console, we logged an object that has data, status, and type. Data contains anything custom we sent back, like our success true. We can go back and add another property to our response and see that show up. Also, we can check out the cookie we made in the application tab of the DevTools. Here is the name we set, the GUI ID, and the expiration date. Back in our app, I have a few pre-made components I use for errors and a loading animation. I won't go into too much detail on them for this video, but basically there's a div that will fade in from the top and show a message, and it can either be red or green. We're going to use that for the error message. It also disappears after a few seconds. And then I also have a simple loading overlay that just covers the page in an opaque box with the words loading animated on top of it. In order to get those two components working, though, I do need to add some global variables. We're going to use the Svelte 5 state runes for these. The loader will just track whether to show it or not. And the notification, the toast, will just have text and a color property. In our login page, we can show our error message by just setting the toast, text, and color. And we should also have a loader that goes away after submission and is shown on submission. We'll put those components in our root layout.svelte file, which is a file that gets loaded on every page in our app. And we'll simply just add them before our content and import them. Now if we try to submit our login with no info, we'll see we get a nice error to show up and then it goes away. And if we try to do it with a bad login, we'll get a different message. So next we need to force people to the login screen if they aren't logged in. As you can see, we can still get to the main page even though we aren't logged in. To do that, we're going to use a hooks.server.ts file right under our src folder. This file is built in but optional. As you can see, it didn't exist at first. It allows you to interrupt all requests before they are sent back to the browser and perhaps do something with it. We're going to use it to check if someone's logged in, and if not, send them to the login page instead. The basic hooks file has a handle function, and this function, if nothing is added to it, will just take the event that was made for the request and return it with no changes. We want to check the session in between though. So we're going to see if there's a cookie on the user's computer. The cookie needs to be the same name as when we set it. We then verify the cookie exists, and if so, we'll check the database for it. The database query will also grab the user's info in the same statement if found. If we found a result and it's not expired yet, we'll add a user object to the event locals. The event locals object is a place to store things that we might need to read on each page, like, for example, the logged in user's info. For that to work, though, we do need to go into the pre-made app.d.ts file and specify that locals will be containing a user object. After the session check, we need to check if they aren't logged in by looking for a missing locals user, and if not, redirect them to the login. We don't want to redirect them to the login if they are on the login page, though. That'll cause a loop, so we add an exception for that. Here we just need to fix the users table, add an S. Now in the browser, if we manually delete our cookie and try to access the root of our site, the hooks file will send us to the login instead. And if we do log in, we get sent back to the root and are able to stay there. Looks like we need to add some code to remove the loader on the main page, though. On there, we can just add the onMount function and remove the loader when the page mounts. While we're here, let's go ahead and make the home page a little bit nicer, plus add a logout link. For this, I'm going to split it with a nav bar on top and a centered main content window. Just to show we have access to the user's info, I'm going to show the email in the header next to our logout link. To access the locals user on this file, we need to send it over as props from a matching page server TS file. In that file, we'll reference a built-in load function, and that function will just take the locals user from the parameters and send it back as a user object. Then on the front end, we can access it using data.user. After the user, I'll add a clickable icon for signing out. I like to use the Tabler website, as I can just grab the SVG code for any icon there. And we can paste that SVG into an anchor tag that will send people to /logout. Here I'm going to use Flexbox to put the email and button side by side and centered vertically. And I'm going to make the email smaller and lighter. Then we'll make a box for the content and move the default text below it. And we'll make this look like a rounded window, as I want to have a background image behind it. And for the background image, I'm going to go into the main app.html file and just add a class to the body for that. And there we go. The site adjusts great to different view sizes. When it gets too small, the sidebar moves to the top and everything else adjusts as well. Then to finish it off, we need the logout page. This will just be a plus page.ts file under a logout path. We don't need a full visible page file for this. Just an endpoint to reach would be fine, kind of like an API endpoint. In that file, we'll just look for a GET response, grab the cookie and the parameters, and validate it on the server by making it expired in the database, and then delete the cookie from the user's browser as well. When deleting a cookie, you need to make sure you have the exact same settings as when you created it, otherwise it won't work. Then the response is just a redirect to the login. And here that is, all working. A few additional advanced things to consider in our hooks file. If someone is on a form, gets logged out in the background and tries to submit that form, the redirect will now cause an ugly error instead of a redirect. Instead, we need to have our code check if the event happening is a form submission and have it return a Svelte form submission object instead. And in that object, there's a built-in redirect where we can send people. And this is also what we had our login page looking for earlier, the redirect response, if it existed. Also, if you ever need some pages to be available without a login, I usually just make a public folder and just exclude that from the login check, like this. Finally, if you ever make your own login protected API endpoints in your app, you can't just redirect either. You would need to return a valid JSON response by doing something like this. And that's it. If you have any questions about this video, just let me know in the comments, and thanks for checking this out.